Hi, I'm Dr. Rose, and this is Introduction to Western Art, so we're continuing our discussion. And today we are talking about Impressionism, continuing our discussion of Impressionism. So far we've learned so much, and we've looked at pieces and got an understanding of what Impressionism is and how it looks and who are the key artists and so forth. But I think it's important for us to focus a little bit more on painting techniques, because Impressionists, very dissimilar to other artists, had techniques that they used to create a certain appearance. So the word impression, let's go over that again. To make an impression of something is not to provide full detail, but to just give you sort of a glimpse. And for Impressionism, that glimpse was often considered blurry, or another word might be hazy. And so initially, when Impressionism began, people did not like it because they felt that the work was unfinished and that it was indeed only an impression and therefore it needed further work. But the artists themselves actually created techniques to accomplish this. So let's go over some of the techniques and we'll look at some of the pieces as we explore this. So first, they use what are known as short, thick strokes when they were painting. So short, thick strokes of paint are used to quickly capture the essence of the subject rather than its details. So think of today when we use a camera. When we use a camera, we take the camera and we identify the object that we want to photograph of, and we focus the lens. And why do we do that? We focus it so we can get a clearer image. And we don't want just the essence of the subject, but we want full detail. And so we focus and focus until we get it exactly clear. And once it's clear, then we snap the photo. Well, these artists were not trying to accomplish that. They were trying to accomplish just getting the essence and not the full detail. So I hope the camera example gives you a modern day understanding of what these artists were trying to accomplish. So let's take a look at this first piece, and it's called Gypsy Girl, 1879. So we've explored a lot of these pieces before, so don't be surprised if you're seeing something you saw already. But now what we're trying to do is understand, what was the artist doing? So here we see a young girl, and we can see her in some detail, but at the same time, there are aspects of her that you're probably thinking, wow, I wish I could see that a little clearer. So first, let's start with her face. So we can see her face very clear. This is 1879 for Gypsy Girl, so that gives you a time frame reference. We can't really see the details of her eyes, and we could see her nose and lips, but kind of faintly, not with the kind of detail that you might be accustomed to with a crisp photo. And take a look at her hair and her attire. So we can see all of those classic lines that you've learned already in this class. Because she's wearing a dress, which of course is made of fabric, we know that contour lines are used. The same thing for her hair. And we see the same thing going on in the background of this image because we're looking at nature behind her. Notice the colors are also rather faint. So we can see that there are some reds and some purples and yellows and so forth. And even the red in her hair, which has more of an orange tinge. Once again, you feel like you need to get closer or focus a little bit more or something to try to see this image better. But that lack of depth in terms of being able to see everything is intentional. So look behind her. If you look behind her arm, you can see that there's a shadow. So even the shadow isn't very detailed, which is very interesting because the shadow is usually a replica of what you're looking at, but here the shadow is even a little bit blurry, which I find really interesting. Note the detail that is there though. For example, the rosy cheeks. So we can see that is clearly done. And we can also see the contrast in color. So the white in her blouse as contrasted with the other colors of her attire, and that she's holding a leaf in her hand. And we can see the contrast in color of the leaf that she's holding in her hand to the skirt that she's wearing. So all of that is done in somewhat of a hazy or blurry detail, but clearly it's lovely, and it gives us an impression of this young gypsy girl. So let's talk about colors a little bit more. Colors are applied side by side with as little mixing as possible, creating a vibrant surface. The optical mixing of colors occurs in the eye of the viewer. So let's think about what we're talking about in regard to mixing. So normally an artist has his or her palette, and they have a brush, and they will use their brush to dip into various colors and mix them a little bit to get a combination of colors. But the Impressionist was more apt to put the colors side by side rather than mixing them. So let's take a look at another image, because the images help us greatly. So this one is called The Boating Party, which is very interesting. And we can see the yellow hat. So look at the yellow hats that all of the individuals are wearing. In terms of the 1, 2, 3, 4, I think there's 5 women, if I'm not mistaken, that are wearing a yellow hat. So you could see that side, and there's also a man with a yellow hat. So we can see that side by side, the yellow with the blue, using contour lines on these hats. There's no mixing to bring these colors together, but they are directly side by side, so you can see each color very clearly. But if you look at the people and the background, which is the natural background, we'll notice once again this faint impressionism. So take a look at the impression that you see there, as well as the contrast in color, and notice that even dark colors are used, black. So look to what appears to be the back of the painting, because remember, this is a flat surface, but the artist was able to accomplish perspective. So the gentleman that is in the back, as well as the other person to the right of him, they're wearing black coat for one of them with a black top hat, and the other one has on a black hat. So those colors are side by side with the other colors without any mixing, so we're not getting any gray tones or anything to that effect. For example, if you mix white with gray, white with black, you're going to get a gray. So look at the woman in the front sitting at the table, and you can see that she has an orange flower in her hat, which gives us the impression that her hat is probably a straw hat because it's not a bright yellow color. Notice that there is like a gray hue in her attire. And you could see that the white is not completely mixed into the black to give you a full gray, but rather you get a side by side of the little white image in the patch of her shoulder as compared to the rest of her arm. And this gives us a sense that whatever she is wearing is not actually black, but it's more toward gray. So the artist even gave us an impression of color, which I think is really fascinating. So take a look at all of the people, and you can see some detail. You kind of have an understanding of what they're doing. You see them sitting at the table, the white tablecloth. There's lots of detail on the table. If you look at the table, you can see the glass bottles filled with some kind of beverage and other foods, and etc. All of this is going on, but we really have an impression rather than great detail. So this piece is really interesting. And this is Miss Lala at the Circus Fernando. So this piece is so impressionistic. So we're going to take some time to try to explore it. First, let's look at the colors. So here we can see once again clear colors, but yet side by side with other colors without a complete mixing of any of the colors. So how do we get to the light blue? In order to get to the light blue, which you see in the background, you would have to take the color blue and mix it with a little bit of white and put that together, and you get the light blue. But notice that there's sort of a gradation of color values. Values is a term that talks about going from one color to another gradually. So since this isn't a drawing class, I didn't get into that deeply. But I do want you to see that as you look at the square right next to the arm. And you can see the gradation of color going from a light blue and then to a lighter blue side by side, and then to a lesser blue, almost a pink color. Now look at the individual and you can see some really interesting detail. Look at the brown skin. So the brown skin is very, very clear, contrasting with the clothing that Miss Lala is wearing. So we see the light purple. Once again, in order to get a full mixture for lavender, you would have to completely mix the colors. But what has happened here is instead you're seeing the values again, or a gradation of color. So look at the back of the individual and come all the way across to the front, and you can see the gradual mixing with the white and going further and further and further till you see a little bit more white, and then we get back to purple again. Look at the shorts that the individual is wearing, and then we see a little bit of yellow and so forth. And this is such an impressionistic piece that we're not able to tell exactly what the individual is doing. And some of you may be thinking in your mind as you're looking at this, that this is clearly not finished. More work could have been done so we could see more detail. But once again, I remind you that Miss Lala at the Circus Fernando is an intentional piece. It was not intended to take you further in terms of detail. And so it gives you a sense of pondering, of looking, of trying to understand exactly what is going on. And even it may lead you to research to try to find out what is happening in this particular piece. And then we have the play of natural light. And this is emphasized. Close attention is paid to the reflection of colors from object to object. So with impressionistic pieces, we can see that this is called The Rehearsal in 1878. So I want you to go back to your materials and remember the artist that draws ballerinas. So keep that in mind as you're looking at this piece. But we're not focusing on the artist right now. What we're focusing on is the technique. So look at the natural light. Look how big the windows are. Now this is intentional because having big windows like this really gives us an opportunity to see the light reflecting through. And you can see it at various spaces on the floor. Don't look at the individuals, look at the floor. And you can see where the light is hitting the floor, and you can see how that's handled with the variations in the paint and how we see the colors side by side and the creation of values. Now the contrasting comes into play with the actual ballerinas. So take a look at their white attire, and then we see an individual in black with gray pants. So all of that is playing on the natural light that we see seeping through the windows. Now also, I want you to pay attention very closely to the nature outside of the window. So don't forget the lines, because no matter the artist, they're always using techniques. So we see vertical and horizontal lines with the windows. We see contour lines for the windows themselves. We see contour lines with the individuals in terms of their clothing and so forth. So there's a lot going on, but in this instance, my goal here is for you to pay attention to how natural light is used in such a sophisticated way. We don't see a lamp, we don't see a lantern, we don't see anything, but we see a beautifully well lit room while these dancers are rehearsing. Hence this piece is called The Rehearsal. So that's the end, and we'll go on to our next presentation, which will also continue our discussion of technique. So I look forward to talking to you about that.